Greetings to all. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic for the lecture is the causes of Russian Revolution. In this lecture, we shall explain important aspects, important issues concerning causes of the Russian Revolution. In this lecture, we shall also discuss important events from the history with respect to Russian Revolution 1905, the February Revolution and the October Revolution. This lecture shall also analyze how internal dynamics of Russia led to important issues not only for Russia but also for world history, namely the First World War, the Second World War and the Cold War. To begin with, when we talk about Russian Revolution 1917, it is a very important political event of the 20th century. Now, this significant political event of the 20th century had an important bearing with respect to history, political science, international relations, and had significant implications for all. This is why to know the causes of Russian Revolution 1917 indeed becomes a very interesting and significant concept. Russian Revolution not only was its impact and its causes were not just about the internal dynamics of the country, but it had a huge bearing on world history, on international relations too. Further, when we talk about Russian Revolution, there are few aspects therein which one needs to analyze. It is very important to look in and understand the role of Bolsheviks. It is significant to analyze the role of Vladimir Lenin, the tradition of the Tsarist rule, the issue of the emergence of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and most important, how with time there was not only change in the entire political apparatus of Russia, but how it had a bearing with respect to the bigger picture of ideological framework to lead world affairs. As we take the learning forward, dear learners, we will now have a quick look at the timeline of the Russian Revolution. Now, this analysis of the chronology, looking at the timeline, becomes significant to understand Russian Revolution and, of course, initiate the debate on causes of the Russian Revolution in a deeper manner. So, let's begin. 1855, roughly if we go by the Gregorian calendar, there was start of reign of Tsar Alexander II. Some few years later, 1861, there was issue of emancipation of the serfs. 1881, Alexander II assassinated, succeeded by Alexander III. Alexander III, that is, when we look at 1881, Alexander II is assassinated, succeeded by Alexander III. Further, taking timeline and understanding the chronology better, 1894, the start of reign of Nicholas II. 1898, first Congress of RSDLP, that's Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. 1900, the foundation of the Socialist Revolutionary Party. 1903, second Congress of Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. Then it is also very important to understand that as we look at this timeline, there was a beginning of split with time that's between two important blocks, that is the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. Let's understand here things further. Bolsheviks wanted a direct change from Tsarism to communism. On the other hand, Mensheviks felt that a transitionary period was necessary. That is, it is also very important to understand that the method of the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks were different. How? Let's ask that. Bolsheviks were radical revolutionaries. Mensheviks were more moderate. The Second Congress of the Social Democratic Labour Party was held in London in 1903. Now herein, it is important to look at the dispute between two important figures here, Lenin and Julius Markov. Bolsheviks, the Russian word for majority, that is Bolshinstvo, right? And so the Bolsheviks primarily became famous as a Lenin's group, and Markov's group was dubbed, that is Menshevik, after Menshinstvo, that is meaning minority. So with this, it becomes important also to look at what happens later. We all just understood that at the Second Congress of Social Democratic Labour Party held in London 1903, there was a split between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. With time, 1904 to 1905, Russo-Japanese War. Russia loses the war. But the Russo-Japanese War, very important to understand, a military conflict between Russia and Japan from 1904 to 1905. Both countries had a claim on Manchuria, an area located in the Korean Empire. And partly in both, when we look at the geographical aspects, partly in both Russia and China. Now, the Russian Revolution of 1905 comes in this context. Therein what we see when we recall the events of the January, that is the Bloody Sunday incident in St. Petersburg. In June, the battleship Potemkin uprising as Odessa on the Black Sea. Few months later, October, there are general strikes and St. Petersburg Soviet is formed. The October Manifesto, an imperial agreement on election to the State Duma. So with this, it also becomes essential to look at what flows after this first revolution, that is the Russian Revolution of 1905, the Bloody Sunday at St. Petersburg, battleship Potemkin uprising at Odessa, the general strike, St. Petersburg Soviet is formed, the October Manifesto, an attempt to change things. So it becomes essential to have a look as to what comes after this first Russian Revolution 1905. In 1906, there is first State Duma. In 1907, second State Duma. And 1907, the third State Duma, because the first one was, we say that from February to June, and this 1907, the third State Duma until 1912. And of course, the issue of the Bolshevik and the Menshevik final split. We just understood that how at 1903, the Markov and Lenin debate, and then, but with time, the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, within that there is final split. 1914, as we all know, the world witnesses the First World War. First World War, often called as the Great War. And herein, in the year of 1914, Germany declares war on Russia. 1916, what we see here is that there are rampant dissent, because the rampant dissent is because of opposition by the people, is because of the food and fuel shortages, the issue of skyrocketing prices. The high prices made people come out to protest. 1917, the Russian history is full of news about strikes. There are several incidents of riots. So here in the timeline, when we understand with respect to the revolution of 1917 now, in January, there are strikes and reported unrest in Petrograd. In February, the February Revolution, wherein demonstrators killed in at the Zanemekska Square. February 27th, troops refused to fire on demonstrators. Desertions are there. Prison, courts, police stations are attacked. Prisons, courts, police stations are looted by angry crowds. Herein, Petrograd Soviet is formed, and in March, Nicholas II abdicates and provisional government is formed. With this, it is important to understand the important future course that comes up in 1917, the important events that come forward in 1917, that is, return of Lenin to Russia. New provisional government is formed. Later, the October Revolution happens, and herein it is very important to understand decree on peace and decree on land. The Soviet government declared the two important decrees, and the Council of People's Commissars. It's important to understand that as we just reflected on this timeline, now we try to analyze the causes one by one. Let's understand the causes of the Russian Revolution. Economic issues. As we just understood from the timeline, inflation, price of goods, wherein prices continue to increase. The issue of skyrocketing prices, but at the same time, there were massive food shortages. Then, as we understand the economic issues, there were no enough ammunitions, or what we can say weapons, for the troops fighting in the war. And then to add to that, another important economic issue, the peasant issue, the peasants' issue in the countryside. Economic crisis continued, and then herein, war also continued. So what happens here is that there is a picture of complete unrest, strikes and riots. Seizure of land from landowners became widespread. The provisional government too then becomes unpopular. Then Bolsheviks, looking at this scenario of widespread economic crisis, the issues with respect to Russia in the First World War, the provisional government becoming unpopular makes Bolshevik famous. This situation makes people more inclined towards the Bolsheviks. People wanted to end war, but at that time, the provisional government decided to continue Russia's involvement in war. March 1917, the Petrograd Soviet declared that it would no longer support the offensive war against Germany. Herein, it becomes essential also to look at the event of the June offensive. What was the June offensive? The provisional government continued with war. There was an attempt to push the Austrians, and this attempt to push the Austrians back also resulted in a setback. Herein, the army was demoralized, and with the same status quo prevailing, there are many events, there are many news reports in the archives of history depicting that how the sailors, the soldiers deserted the Russian army. Becomes also important then to look in towards the July offensive. The July offensive, wherein the provisional government headed by Prince Georgy Lvov was formed in Russia, again going by the important dates that we get from various historical narratives, 15th March 1917. That is, maintain the Russian war effort. It was criticized by the formation of Soldiers' Committee that demanded peace without annexations or indemnities. Herein, it also becomes important to look at the Kornilov revolt. Kornilov revolt was an attempted military coup d'etat by the commander-in-chief of the Russian army, General Lavar Kornilov, from 27th to 30th August 1917. And this is very important to understand that the Kornilov revolt was against the Russian provisional government. Moving forward, here then comes the October Revolution. The October Revolution, also called as the Great October Socialist Revolution. The October Revolution is also known as the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, with this October Revolution, there was seizure of state power by the Bolshevik Party. It is very important to understand that when we look at the Great October Socialist Revolution, the October Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution, that this took place with an armed insurrection. And it capitalized, very important to understand, that we just discussed on the various issues and aftermaths of the February Revolution in the very same year. Moving forward, we find that in October Revolution, workers, Soviets overthrew the Russian provisional government in Petrograd. This also ended the phases of revolution in Russia. Very important to understand. A country that was battling revolution 1905, then comes the February Revolution 1917, and then comes the October Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, with the workers' Soviet overthrowing the Russian provisional government. This also then ends the phase of revolution in Russia. There is signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in March 1918. This peace treaty between the Bolshevik government of Soviet Russia and the Central Powers, namely Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, that ended Russia's participation in the First World War. And very important clause of the treaty, Soviet Russia defaulted on all the Imperial Russia's commitments to the Triple Entente alliance. The new government passed the Decree on Peace and, as discussed, Decree on Land, the latter of which redistributed the land and wealth to peasants throughout Russia. The first decree served to withdraw Russia from First World War. The second decree, issued by the new Bolshevik regime, was entitled On Land. It's very important to understand that it abolished private ownership of land. Further, when we look at Decree on Peace, it proposed an immediate withdrawal of Russia from the First World War. And also, when we look at Decree on Peace, the decree was implemented as discussed through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. As we understand the causes of the Russian Revolution, let us now look at some important academic work which has been done with respect to the topic of understanding the causes of the Russian Revolution. Now, these academic works shall be of great use with respect to adding more ideas, adding more debates with respect to our answers, our research papers, and above all, adding more to our knowledge with respect to understanding the causes of Russian Revolution. As we go forward with the discussion, we take reference to the very important book by Mikhin, that is The Russian Revolution, A New History. Now, when we look at this book, The Russian Revolution, A New History, one gets a sense that it is a revisionist political history to understand, to reanalyze the Russian Revolution. This work by McMeekin, I repeat, this work by McMeekin, The Russian Revolution, A New History, the context is also very important because this book comes at the time of the centenary, the 100th anniversary of Russian Revolution. In 1920, when we look at the important issues in the book, one gets a sense that Russia in 1920s was in financial crisis, and more than 20 million, if you go by from the figures that the book presents, Russians had died. However, in 1950, a third of the globe had followed the path of communism. It then becomes very important to understand that one must go away from the perspective offered by the Marxists herein with respect to class struggle. That is, whenever we are trying to understand any revolution, it is very important to understand with respect to history that who benefits from the changes. McMeekin's work, The Russian Revolution, A New History, not only helps us to understand revolution and its causes in a deeper sense, but it also presents to us revolution in a very important, with a very important question: who benefits? Moving forward, another very important work by Daniel Orlovsky, A Companion to the Russian Revolution. Now, in this work, The Russian Revolution of 1917, the work clearly tells us that we need to understand that this revolution impacted the geopolitical landscape of the world. And this book, which has a wonderful compilation of chapters, it has some very significant chapters, some very important ideas with respect to issue of violence in war and revolution, the role of Russian political parties, the Bolshevism and the phenomena thereof. So therefore, it is not only important to look at the political history while looking at the causes of the Russian Revolution, but also look at the cultural history, the influence on early Soviet culture, the global aftermath and the impact of the Russian Revolution, amongst others. Another important work which helps us comprehend the causes of Russian Revolution in a very deeper manner, S.A. Smith's work, Russia in Revolution, An Empire in Crisis, 1890 to 1928. I repeat, S.A. Smith's work, Russia in Revolution, An Empire in Crisis, 1890 to 1928. In this work, there is a sense that Russian Revolution 1917, it impacted world history. Further, not only impacting world history, it also changed Russia. How? In the political sense, in the economic sense, socially and culturally. So the important inputs with respect that one gets from the book, that is, why did the attempt by the Tsarist government to implement political reform after the 1905 revolution, why did it fail? Why did the Bolsheviks succeed in seizing and holding to the power? Why did the new economic policy introduced in 1921 created issues? And again, Lenin and the Stalin, one must also then look at the power struggle inside the Bolshevik party. So therefore, S.A. Smith's work, Russia in Revolution and Empire in Crisis, 1890 to 1928, gives us some very important sense of these deeper questions that one must understand with respect to understanding the causes of the Russian Revolution. So the Russian Revolution of 1905, also known as the First Russian Revolution, was a wave of mass political and social unrest. Tsar Nicholas II enacted constitutional reforms with respect to the October Manifesto, and an important consequence of the First Russian Revolution 1905, that is, establishing the State Duma, the multi-party system, the Russian Constitution of 1906. With this, the issue is that despite popular participation in the Duma, the parliament was unable to issue laws of its own. And somewhere the debate being the power of the Duma being limited. What happens in the February Revolution later? That is, there is abdication of the Tsar, there is end of autocratic rule in Russia, provisional government is established, reforms are introduced, Russia continues to fight in the First World War. But however, people's dissatisfaction with the Tsarist imperial government, there is growing dissatisfaction among the peasants, workers, soldiers. There is disintegration of the imperial army. And on November 7, 1917, members of the Bolshevik political party seized the power in the capital of Russia, Petrograd, now it's St. Petersburg. This conflict ultimately led to Bolshevik victory in the Russian Civil War, and this led to the establishment of Soviet Union in 1922. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture presented you significant inputs and insights with respect to understanding the causes of the Russian Revolution. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all for the lecture. Thank you very much.